It was very clear that something happened in the year 2001.
Here, have a pill. All you had to do was crush it and shoot it.
And that's when I just went off the deep end.
A lot of these mothers are going to get together and say they were just told a bunch of lies.
It's just like something clicked.
This isn't your problem. This isn't my problem. This isn't just a medical problem. It's a society problem.
This program was made possible by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
It's nearly 20 years into the 21st century, and we're now engaged in the longest war in American history, and we're fighting right here at home. "50 years after President Richard Nixon declared his war on drugs, the battles have only intensified. Prison populations are swelling, and drug-related violence continues to target the soul of America. Over the last 20 years, more and more of these war fatalities are self-inflicted. You can think of it as a new type of hand-to-hand combat, fueled by big business, legitimized by state governments, and operated at street level by medical professionals, many of whom had only the desire to help.
In the 80s, in the Reagan administration, a company by the name of Purdue Pharma convinced the federal government that pain should be considered in the vital signs. And doctors have to address abnormalities in vital signs.
There was a push for the fifth vital sign, pain, to come onto the scene. The first four being your temperature, your pulse, your respiration, and your blood pressure. And pain being the fifth.
Of course it's not. It's not a vital sign.
You should just ask everybody if they have any pain, and if they do, that it would be an automatic prescription for opioids because they're safe.
They were convincing the medical profession that these medications were safe, they were not addicted, they were harmless, and they would manage people's pain with fewer or no side effects. And so the medical profession bought into the lie pretty much, and it became deeply embedded. You know, the FDA approving the medications and the pharmaceutical companies producing them and doctors prescribing them, and everybody for a time feeling that they were safe.
This is addiction. This is what we're talking about. We're talking about creating, maintaining, sustaining addiction to drugs.
The absolute insanity of it was at the exact same time that they were telling us to prescribe OxyContin, which we knew was no more effective than anti-inflammatories for acute pain. Nancy Reagan was saying, just say no.
Soon after
you
that,
can't have it both ways.
children in Oakland.
And that was the beginning of the very bipolar presentation of pain control, and narcotics in the United States.
By 2001, here in Tennessee, lawmakers were endorsing legislation that had become popular across the country. The idea in the medical community was to focus on easing people's pain, to make that goal central to patient care. And the pharmaceutical industry was enthusiastically on board.
It was called the Intractable Pain Treatment Act. And within that statute, there was a section called the Pain Patients Bill of Rights.
And then the question asked, who else has passed this? And the sponsor says, well, 29 states have already passed this. It's time for Tennessee to pass it. It was unanimous, it passed. They actually said that the reason for passing this is to protect physicians who are willing to prescribe these drugs that, remember, Purdue was saying that these drugs were safe.
As a citizen of Tennessee, you have the right under the statute to have your pain treated as you see fit. And then it went on specifically to say, and if that includes the use of opiate, narcotic prescription painkillers, they had to write prescriptions, or they had to refer you to what would become the pain clinics where you could get your prescription filled.
Were they crying? No. Were they writhing? No. Were they solemn? No. But they said they were a 10 out of 10 pain. And now I'm obligated to treat them because pain is subjective and it's the fifth vital sign. And if I don't, and they are insistent, then I'm not appropriately treating this patient.
The family physician then was just brought along as this seemed to be the standard of care. Oh my, I've been ignoring the chronic pain in my patients and I want to be a good doctor, so.
You get a woman at 16 years old who rates her pain that she's having for just normal menstrual cramps from 0 to 10. She'll say it's a 10, it's the worst pain I've ever had in her life. But what she's really complaining about is the dysphoria.
They'll talk about, oh, I got this from the doctor. You know, they gave me this medicine.
So it was basically a ticket, you know, for anybody that claimed to have pain, which can't be disproven, you know, by a doctor.
Do you hurt? It's always yes.
But if you gave them some Percocet or some morphine, they were very happy. Unfortunately, they were happy and went on to develop a devastating addiction. About a quarter of the time.
Throughout the 2000s, it was methamphetamine that had Tennessee's upper Cumberland region reeling. Meth, homemade and illegal, a quick, cheap high. Then came a new, deadly, and totally legitimized drug epidemic. It caught communities like ours by complete surprise.
And the effects showed up slower, but then the problem, to my way of thinking, is much deeper. It cuts through a much broader swath of our society, of our citizenship. It's not just the people who are making a decision to use an illegal drug, it's literally everybody. It's people who have had dental work done, it's people who have had, you know, back surgery or back injury, or people who have just had an issue with chronic pain, believing that the medications would do something to resolve that.
So we see teens who had a broken bone, a strained muscle, who come to the emergency room, go to their primary care physician.
Yeah, it can start so innocently.
It really came to a head once I broke my hand and they put me on a prescription.
He had an ankle injury and the doctor prescribed Loratab or whatever opioid it was, that it kind of pulled him in.
I was 14 and I'd been prescribed opiates as the result of a snowboarding accident.
So during birth of our daughter Charlotte, and Tiffany had hemorrhaged and had almost bled out, and they put her on a prescription of Loratabs.
And the ski resort doctor actually prescribed the opiates to me. I remember him saying, you know, don't take too many of these ibuprofen. If you're in a lot of pain, you can take more of these, and it was the opiates.
It makes them feel better than they've ever felt, and it's the beginning. And maybe they don't even realize at that moment that it is the beginning.
I was about 16 years old, and I remember I had just, you know, scored and had gotten some opiates. And before I did them, I had this moment where I was like, man, I think like I have an issue with this, you know?
My daughter broke her arm at 13 years old, went to the doctor, and it was Katie bar to the door. She had broke her arm, they gave her hydrocodone, and she liked it. And that's what I tell her son now.
Did a spinal tap thing, and it went bad. I had to lay flat for 6 weeks and take the Perc 10s again every 4 hours. And that's when I just went off the deep end.
At 13 years old, she was given permission by a doctor to take something she didn't need to take, and then is still fighting that at 33 years old. That's a long time to be fighting this.
The law actually required medical professionals to write or refer addictive narcotic prescriptions to virtually any patient who asked. So naturally, the use and sales of opioid painkillers soared. Pharmaceutical companies kept the supply flowing to local pharmacies and in turn, household medicine cabinets throughout the community.
I developed some friends whose parents got large prescriptions to opiates, and that was, you know, that's what really kicked that off.
I was 15 the first time I tried opiates. I was at a friend's house and they had some things and asked if I wanted to try, and I did.
If a medicine cabinet is full of opiates and there's teenagers in the house, there's a high likelihood that they're gonna misuse those or get access to those.
I had gotten them from a friend, and I was a senior in high school.
And it was just massive quantities of this medicine, and we knew ways to get in there and to get it.
They see family members using medications and nothing's wrong with them. And my friends say that makes you feel good, so they experiment.
I had a few friends that I knew stole the medication from like their grandmas or their dads, stuff like that.
We work cases every day where people complain that someone has stole their medication. Sometimes it's friends, sometimes it's even family members, and sometimes it's just mysteriously disappears.
I remember being at a football game and just walking with some friends that were older than me, and they were like, "Here, try this," and I just took it.
Scott and I spoke a lot about what pulled you into this, and he said it was the pain pills that he took that hooked him on opioids that had complete control over him.
Once I took Kalodimos, that was really my first experience with it. It's just like something clicked.
There are some people that may be able to take hydrocodone, but there are other people who are genetically predisposed who, the first time they take it, it makes them feel better than they've ever felt before. It seems to fill a hole that they didn't know they had.
It's almost like your body's telling you this is it. And it was like this euphoria, and it gave me what I've really been looking for, which was to be numb.
I remember that I liked the feeling that it gave me because I was in a lot of pain at that time over a lot of family issues that I was having. And, it made me feel more normal.
It was like I'd been holding my breath like my whole life, and I could finally exhale.
A lot of the stuff with the brain is pretty simplistic. A lot of these drugs actually are going to dopamine receptors in your brain, which is in the frontal part of your brain. And what happens is that it makes you feel good. It's very simple. It fills a hole.
You feel better because it dumps your dopamine and it stimulates your neural pathways, but then you always come back off of the drug, not back to your norm, but below. And so the process happens where you actually move your set point to where your norm is feeling like crap.
So that's why it takes so much more medicine to feel the same feelings that you felt. That you just have to inundate them with those medications in order to feel normal.
It's sort of like you're cashing in all of your good days now to have one great day, but then what you're trading off is the next days or maybe even the rest of your whole life, if it gets bad enough, is going to be physically miserable for you.
And the things that used to make you feel good, your baby laughing, your wife hugging and kissing you, those no longer have the same feeling. They're not even on the same scale as the drug, the feeling that the drug gives you.
And I've seen that time and time again. And I've seen families destroyed by it.
Perhaps the biggest surprise when it comes to the addictive quality of opioids is that it came as a surprise at all. As far back as the 1800s, pharmaceutical companies were promoting opiate derivatives for relief from physical maladies. And each new drug wave presented its own problems for the users.
Laudanum was any combination of an opiate and alcohol. At the time, it was actually tincture of opium. It was useful. People were dropping dead of diarrheal illness. You got to remember, in the Civil War, more people died of diarrheal illness than injury. An opiate side effect is constipation. By the late 1800s, we're already synthesizing morphine out of opium. Morphine's original indication was not pain, it was cough. So morphine was cough medicine. Within a couple of decades, it was found to be abused. And the Bayer company came out with Bayer heroin, the cheapest specific for the relief of cough. After heroin was invented, then it became the OxyContin. We knew. The doctors have done this. We have addicted people for centuries, and it was all the same illness. And we've been doing this since the 1800s.
And when you start using at a young age, you know, you really don't understand what you're getting yourself into. You think, oh, I'm just having a good time. It's not a big deal. I'm just gonna do this on the weekend. I'm just gonna do this tonight. And then, you know, before you know it, it snuck up on you.
I started doing them a lot more on the weekends, and then progressed through the school days, and I did it every morning before school, and slowly just became addicted.
And I would look in the mirror every day, and it sounds dramatic, but it's the truth, and I could not stand who was looking back at me.
It didn't take long. I was doing them every single day, and one day I woke up and thought I was dying and knew that, you know, I had to have something.
When you start messing around with it, it's just hard to stop, and you just can't make the right decisions you need to do that.
I couldn't stand the things that I was doing. I couldn't stand the damage that I was causing because I was conscious of it, but I just couldn't stop the cycle.
I would go to school and not out in class. My mom got a phone call from a teacher of mine, and I got searched at school.
And I found that when it was time for me to come off that medication, that I couldn't. Within a few months, I was, you know, shooting up.
It was already like too late. I was completely addicted, and not only physically addicted, but mentally addicted.
It took me a long time to realize that I had a problem. Even waking up sick in the morning and knowing that I needed more, but I didn't want to admit to myself that I had a problem.
It was like I just had this like guy in me like all the time that was like screaming for somebody to like understand what was going on with me, but I couldn't communicate it. Like I couldn't communicate what was going on in my mind to the people in my life, to my family.
But ultimately, you have to add more medication, take more medication to get that same feeling that you're getting. And then you're taking so much medication that you're starting to have those negative side effects.
And it created more pain than it numbed, you know. And when I would come off of those opiates, the pain would be there like tenfold.
I woke up in my bed, or I couldn't fall asleep actually. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning, and my legs were crawling.
You're sweating, but you're freezing to death, and you get cold chills, and your stomach hurts, and you start throwing up, and using the bathroom, having diarrhea, and your legs hurt. It's awful. Imagine the flu times 20. It's terrible.
Woke up the next day, and you know, that's when a friend that had taken pills said, you know, hey buddy, you were going into withdrawal.
Honestly, feel like you're dying.
You know, once I had my first experience with withdrawal symptoms as a result of my use, it was like picking up a second job.
I started spending all of our money on drugs from the street.
I was homeless, and I had begged my mom to let me stay with her, and she did let me stay with her.
At one point, I lived in my car for almost a year. I had one of those converter things that you could plug in, and I had a microwave in my trunk. And I'd pull it out and plug it in and have cans of food.
And that night I'd stole from her, and she found out about that, and she just looked at me with like these tears in her eyes, and she was like, I just want my son back, you know?
You know, I had to, on a daily basis, figure out how I was gonna lie or manipulate to get the money to be able to afford it.
This is an expensive venture. This is not something that you're going to spend very little money on. If you don't have a job, how are you paying for this?
In a region historically challenged for jobs, opportunities, and income equity, opioids, both legal and illicit, became integrated into the local economy. Patients seeking drugs would doctor shop, looking for physicians who would write a prescription. We started seeing signs for pain clinics, where the pills were bought and resold on the open market. Authorities called it diversion.
So it went from moonshine to marijuana to methamphetamine production, and now to the misuse of prescription medications.
They get the prescription, they cash it, they get the medicine in hand, and they sell it. Diversion.
It was very easy to go to a pain clinic as long as you were 18. A lot of them, the doctors would just write you a prescription just so they would have money, and there's an 18-year-old with a pocket full of pills for just a couple $100.
You're going to have to deal at least part of your medications in order to pay for your monthly prescription. We have people who are on fixed incomes.
Grandma goes to the pain clinic and says, I have chronic pain. She gets 120 10 milligram hydrocodone. This is the cost, very little at the drugstore. She is not an addict, and she is also not in chronic pain any more than anybody else is. But then the daughter or the son then takes those pills and sells them to a dealer for $1 a milligram.
I would use my prescription really quick, and I would call them and tell them, you know, I needed more, or something happened, or I was still in pain, and the doctor would just write another prescription.
But say you get, 90 Opana 20s, you can sell those for about $80 right now, street value.
So look at that horny problem now. To clamp down on that system, we're going to reduce this little old lady living in the woods in Clay County or Putnam County, reduce her income by 50%. So that's what her family kind of looks at too, see.
We are in a socioeconomically depressed area. People are pressed all the time to pay their bills. It's a whole lot easier to live sedated than it is to put up with the despair. So unfortunately, one of the reasons I think the Upper Cumberlands got hit so hard is basically we are very, very hard pressed to make ends meet.
But it doesn't matter where you come from, poor, rich, or you live in a fancy neighborhood, or you live, in the projects. Everyone is susceptible to being drugged down in this crisis. It's terrible.
And as prescribed and diverted opioids spread through communities, the inevitable victims of the crisis were the most innocent, and by far the most vulnerable.
She's tachycardic. And right now she's breathing about 130 times a minute.
I first encountered neonatal abstinence syndrome, NAS, there. It wasn't a lot of cases, but it was enough that I understood what it was and how to take care of it.
The way these babies present, they know something's wrong with these babies. They can't be sent home. They can't be consoled. They're crying. They're born in pain.
We would try morphine and it wouldn't touch them. You would up the dose and up the dose, and they just weren't responding. We had babies that would stop breathing before their symptoms would go away.
There are only 50 cases of neonatal abstinence syndrome in the whole state in 2000. In 2001, there became a sequential increase in the number of cases, which pointed out something happened in 2001.
These were the babies who literally would rub the skin off their elbows, their knees, their buttocks would be excoriated and bleeding. They would constantly scrub at their faces with their hands until their fingernails bled, until their faces were raw. They couldn't actually suck the bottle because they were so frantic that they would just scream and scream, and you would have to put a tube down to feed them and let them suck their pacifier because they weren't coordinated enough to feed. So it was obvious there was a problem.
When I became involved with it and decided to to track this epidemiology to see if we could identify what was the root cause of the epidemic in Upper Cumberland.
It was horrific, and it was so bad that we felt like they needed to be in a NICU setting. They needed to be under bright lights in a bed where we could monitor every breath, every movement, every heartbeat.
What we did was to collect the statistics published by the Department of Health and analyze that data. And looking at that, it was very clear that something happened in the year 2001 that was feeding this epidemic.
But unfortunately in that setting, the phones are ringing and the doors are dinging and alarms are going off, and these babies could not handle this kind of stimulation.
So just a simple internet search revealed that there was a law called the 2001 Intractable Pain Treatment Act and the Patient's Bill of Rights that basically gave the patient the right to demand these drugs.
Soon thereafter, he and I agreed to meet. He showed me the statistical data that he had developed and done the research to really look and see what was the seminal moment really when we started to see this upward trajectory of NAS births in our community.
Everyone was kind of in disbelief that it was actually babies withdrawing from drugs.
These mothers are taking drugs that were designed to, were said to prevent pain, but they were actually causing pain in this innocent life.
And because of the 2001 Intractable Pain Act, if someone had a heavy cycle or they had a lot of cramps, they were giving them opioids just to treat menstrual cramps. And those women would get addicted to those, but because they came from someone in a white coat who meant well, albeit, they were now addicted to these drugs, and they were going to have a child with neonatal abstinence syndrome unbeknownst to them.
You know, many physicians were resistant to accepting that these babies were coming in withdrawing, in part because we brought this on ourselves. We were the ones looking at these patients, seeing that they were in pain and trying to make things better.
And it's not just that they're hurting, but they actually need this drug to survive because they had been addicted to the drug.
I've had mothers who've had more than one baby born addicted. Moms that tell me, I really want off this medicine, but I just can't do it. We didn't understand the disease process for what it was at that time, and we contributed to it. So it was a really hard pill to swallow when people came in and told us these things. They were also told at the pain clinics, your baby will not withdraw from these medications. And they're still told on a pretty regular basis. We were told we would not withdraw.
I think eventually a lot of these mothers are going to get together and say they were just told a bunch of lies, that these drugs were not harmful to their child, and it really is.
It's a distinct, obvious contradiction to the Hippocratic Oath, and it angers me.
As opioid sales and street diversion grew, pharmaceutical profits soared. The number of addicted patients exploded, and the crisis continued to grow like a cancer. In the Upper Cumberland, the number of opioid-dependent babies born to addicted mothers grew year upon year upon year.
Then when I got elected to the State House some 8 years ago, I was able to see where this progression across our state was happening, not just in pockets of regions like ours, but from Upper East Tennessee really to Memphis.
General Assembly asked the Department of Health to give a report on neonatal abstinence syndrome before they started the legislative year of 2018.
What the solution was to everyone else was continue to put these moms on these medications. And we saw these methadone clinics popping up seemingly everywhere. And that's still a prescription, and that's actually the most common drug in our area that women are taking and that babies are born addicted to.
And what struck me was that they said that 86% of the babies in 2016 born addicted to prescription opioids received that prescription from the physician who is treating their mother for addiction to that drug.
This is an issue that she's struggling with, and they don't want her to go back to using illicit drugs because they could be tainted in some way that would be more likely to hurt the babies in ways that they wouldn't necessarily know if they were tainted. So it's better to have something that they know what it is and theoretically can control the amount that they're receiving.
You know, to the baby, if they were on heroin and now you're going to switch them to Subutex, that makes sense, but actually if you talk to the pediatricians, Subutex, they don't consider Subutex much any worse really than heroin.
But the baby doesn't know the difference between a prescription drug and a non-prescription drug. So babies who are born addicted have that switch flipped. They have that proclivity to be addicted later in life because they're born addicted before they ever knew that they were addicted.
And it's like an alcoholic. Once you've been an alcoholic, you've had a physical dependency. You see this class of drugs again anytime during your life, you're going to be at risk for recurrence.
So now when they're 12 years old and they break their ankle and they go in and have surgery or just a cast and they're given a few hydrocodone, they feel so incredibly good and they love that feeling. Why? Because their brain is telling them, this is what you need. That center's been activated. You can't turn it off.
So I think the likelihood that that child would go through life with never seeing another opioid is probably close to zero.
And then also, this is a treatment for their drug addiction. And there are some people who believe that they can be on this medication for the rest of their lives to control their drug addiction.
And the chances are good if the mother stays on these drugs for maintenance after birth. I think the chances are very good they'll get their drugs again from their mother.
Eventually, coming off the medication has to be the goal. Even if you only wean them down by 10% every 2 weeks, you would come down a pretty dramatic amount, if not completely off by the time you had delivered. We spend a lot of time and effort to make sure that the mothers can stay there with the babies. We'll even move them to the pediatric floor so that the mom can be the primary caregiver, not the nursing staff for these infants, so they get a feel for their infant. We've really changed the face of how we treat this problem. I don't want to call it a disease, not in babies.
While there is help to be found, parents involved in addiction threaten the physical and emotional well-being of not only babies, but children of all ages.
It takes away a child's security because their parents or caretakers are addicted to drugs, which of course is very damaging to everyone, but particularly our vulnerable children.
My son's father and I, we had a really good relationship and we shared custody. He had my son every other week and it worked well.
And it was only a couple months after Charlotte was born that I started noticing money was coming up out of the account.
Aiden came home, he was very distraught, and he said, "Mom, I don't want to ride with Dad anymore." I asked him what had happened, and he said he was in the car going to school, and it looked like Daddy was falling asleep and went off the road a little bit. And that was the end for me.
And that's when things really started to get nasty.
I think he just started using a little more frequently until his life spiraled out of control. He lost his job. He's lost multiple jobs now because of it. And he's lost his son. So Scott became his main father figure. Scott also had addiction problems and he relapsed about a year after Aiden came to live with us for the most part.
And her excuse is that she's buying stuff on eBay and the packages aren't showing up. And it didn't take very long for me to figure it out.
Our wedding was planned for about 6 weeks after he came out of treatment, so we called that off. That was a stressor in itself. He relapsed about 3 weeks after that and overdosed about a week after he relapsed.
You know, multiple times in my bathroom at home, waking up 45 minutes later with a needle hanging out of my arm and my kids downstairs. So a lot of overdoses and a lot of denial.
I got a call from Scott's boss who was asking me if I knew where he was. And I immediately got concerned because Scott was a very consistent and responsible employee. I called Scott's mom, asked her if she had heard from him. She had not. So I shared Scott's new address with his boss, and his boss said he was going to go out there.
I woke up in the ambulance. I wasn't responsive. I had 1 beat per minute for 5 minutes, and they almost pronounced me dead. But all I could think about was my 2 girls and what I was doing to them.
His door was locked, but his car was there, so we couldn't get in the house. And his mom had already called his stepdad to come, who arrived before I got there. He was able to kick in the back door of his house, and he found him on the couch, dead.
And the kids were with my mom, and got a phone call from Tiffany's dad. It said that she's dead.
She would ask where Daddy was, and I didn't know what to tell her. She just wanted him to be there. She has no concept of death at 2.5 years old, or you'll never see your dad again. There's none of that.
Charlotte was 3 years old when she lost her mother, and it was tough. It's the kid. It's like, do you take your child to her mother's funeral? And we made the decision to take her. Pictures come up on the screen, and Charlotte starts yelling, "That's my mommy!" And I just couldn't hold it together, because she doesn't understand. It's just heartbreaking to know that, she got drugged into the middle of it.
That was the thing they did together, was eat Lucky Charms. That was their bonding. So we'd go to the grocery store, and she'd see Lucky Charms and say, "Where's Daddy?"
The CDC did a study in the early 90s called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. And they actually were able to tell by interviewing a child, from physical neglect to emotional neglect to addiction in the family to incarceration in the family. And they can predict the more of those domains you were exposed to, the worse your behavior was, and the more likely you were to become addicted.
My daughter is angry. She lashes out at school. She kind of defies authority. My son lost Scott in November, and his dad lost all visitation rights in January. Even though he's still physically here, he's no longer active in his life. It dawned on me that he might think that every man deals with addiction. And when I asked him if he did, he said, kind of. So when I think about my kids in addiction, I have major concerns, especially for my son, who's experienced the trauma of it.
Most people don't understand what happens when somebody overdoses. The overdose itself is very insidious. It's slow. It's not very fast in general. And what happens is your respiratory drive goes away.
It was a quiet thing. And you don't realize how it adds up until you start asking, our county coroner, how many deaths have we had, and how did these people die?
So what we're seeing, a good many overdoses is where somebody believes they're taking a hydrocodone pill or an Oxycontin, and it's really a counterfeit pill that's been produced by somebody that looks very realistic but contains fentanyl or carfentanil, and it contains a deadly amount.
The potency relates to how strongly the medicine attaches to the receptor, the pain receptor. And the higher the potency, the easier it is to overdose on. Fentanyl is insanely potent.
That's a very difficult evolutionary step in this problem, because people, even with high tolerance, don't have the physical tolerance to take that much fentanyl and survive it.
In 2018 alone, 72,000 people lost their lives to overdose, up 10% from the previous year. More than a third of those who died, 29,000, were killed by fentanyl. Yet the research for new pharmaceutical painkillers keeps going, unabated, and new, stronger drugs enter both legal and illicit delivery chains.
The FDA gets half of its income from the pharmaceutical companies it oversees. I just don't think they can be impartial. We just approved a drug that is 100 times more potent than fentanyl. Do we really need that?
But even as some companies widen the opioid options, others have developed life-saving miracle drugs.
We still currently issue naloxone, specifically. The brand we're using now is Narcan, and I think that's probably the most popular, and it's commonly referred to as Narcan.
Narcan is very interesting. It's an opiate reversal agent. It can be given intramuscularly as a shot. It can be shot up the nose. It can be sprayed down the throat.
I would suggest we were probably one of the first, if not the first, in the state of Tennessee to issue Narcan.
And Narcan is an amazing tool, but it is not a cure. It wears off in 15-20 minutes. A patient can go back out. So if you do use Narcan, you do have to call 911 or get that patient to the emergency room. But it is a lifesaver.
When we administered the naloxone, then they were revived. And so whether those individuals would have overdosed and died had we not intervened, I don't know. But I know we had a positive change.
And as the tools for survival have improved, so too has public awareness, pathways to recovery, and society's willingness to understand and to help.
Addiction is a treatable disease. It's not a moral failure. It's a treatable disease, and everybody is coming to recognize that and helping people get treatment for the disease without looking down on them or stigmatizing them.
And it goes back to the self-worth thing. I think that the most important thing we can communicate to somebody who's struggling with an addiction disorder is their purpose, like that they have purpose and that they have worth.
In most cases, it were people who had prescription really for drugs, and it led to other things, this desire, issues with pain.
They're not bad people. They're someone's child. They're someone's parent. They're our neighbor. They're our brother, our sister. It's someone that we know.
It was literally people that I went to church with. It's people that we see at Kroger all the time. These are people that we know.
If people feel like that they're going to be judged, that they're going to lose their job, that they're not going to be able to be a productive member of society again after they admit that they have these issues, then they're not going to admit they have them. But then, where is that going to lead?
And there's no shame in stepping up and getting help. As a matter of fact, people who do that, they become the heroes because people see them do that, and then they know that it's okay.
The worst thing we can do is say, well, you just need to quit, because it's not that simple.
And there's so many people standing by in our area ready to help, and those vary. The anti-drug coalitions, which are in almost every county, are great locations to call for confidential referrals to treatment.
Just don't be afraid to ask, because it may save your life in the end.
Somebody on Suboxone who stays with the program, who takes the medicine as they're supposed to, doesn't abuse it, shows up for their drug screen, shows up for their pill counts, they tend to do quite well. They tend to get back into society, they get family back. It's kind of like the reverse of a country music song. They get their family back, they get the dog back, they get the house back, they get the car back.
My personal experience is that abstinence is the gold standard for recovery, and because it's all about renewing the mind, and it's about behavior change.
Vivitrol is now on the scene. It's a medication that we use for women or anyone who's addicted to try to help them stay off of medications long term. It's a non-opiate, and they can take this to help them not feel those cravings.
I know some people who are on medically assisted treatment, they say that they feel it has saved their life. And then I know a lot of people like me who did not do medically assisted treatment, and that we feel like being, completely clean after our medically detox, not on medically assisted treatment, has saved our lives. So I have saw both sides of that. I try not to knock the way anyone else does recovery, because I don't know what they need in their recovery.
And they go to treatment and the light's clicking and there's light in their eyes, and then they relapse, and then it's like all hope is gone. But it's not, because it's planting seeds. And that's what we have to do with this addiction epidemic. We have to plant seeds.
Talk to a teacher, a counselor, someone that you're close to, someone in your church, or just reach out to someone that you trust and that can give you advice and guidance.
Just make sure you get people around you who believe in you, who are rooting for you, who believe that you can do it, and you just hold on to them and let them tell you things about you that you don't even believe in yourself, and just keep going with it, riding with the punches, and just try your best.
But the greatest gift that we can give anybody is to not give up on them. And to know that there's people fighting for you, that's a huge deal. It's a really huge deal.
Never stop stopping, because one day you'll stop and you won't have to go back. And I think that's the most important thing to communicate to somebody, is that you're worth it, and never stop stopping.
And if I hadn't made that decision to go to treatment, I wouldn't be a father. And Charlotte wouldn't have either of her parents. I'd be laying right there with Tiffany.
But after I finally got detox and I got my own thoughts back, I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to get out, and I want to get my kids back, and I just want to stay clean this time, like for good, and I don't want to live this way anymore.
My mom used to have to deadbolt herself into her bedroom at night, and my dad installed an alarm system to keep me out of the house. And I have a relationship back with them,
Like, oh, by the way, I'm remarried, I have another beautiful child, and my life's great. And I'm did I forget to mention that? Things get better, when you get sober.
After years battling raging addiction, those on the front lines turned hard lessons into an effective response.
Most bills that happen in the legislature start with someone locally, something they see, an idea like that.
We talked with our local legislators, Ryan Williams and Paul Bailey, and they introduced a bill to repeal this act.
In the legislative process, do you have lots of hot pans on the stove, if you will, but rarely do they have a handle. I think that was what was interesting about this, is that we could literally put our hands on what a solution would be to the problem, because we're repealing an act in the Tennessee Code annotated that we passed.
Back in 2001, this body passed the 2001 Intractable Pain Act. Last year, this body decisively voted for the repeal of this act. Since 2001, we've seen a plague-like proportion of the use of opioids in our state. By repealing this act, it would also remove the Intractable Pain Act of Tennessee and all the rules promulgated with that act. With that explanation, Madam Speaker, I renew my motion.
House Bill 25, having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare it passed. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is tabled. Next bill.
So the total repeal of the Intractable Pain Treatment Act and the Patient's Bill of Rights, Pain Patients' Bill of Rights, was repealed.
When we did pass the bill, it was a great relief, really, for me, and for a lot of medical professionals who were trying to do the right thing at the right time, in particularly in the Upper Cumberland and other areas where this was in plague-like proportions already.
The repeal of that act made a lot of doctors feel like they could go back to pursuing their profession the way they wanted to.
It's a sacred thing to have a patient trust you. To me, it was an absolute sacred thing.
It's interesting how we keep using these new drugs, and I believe the reason we keep using these new drugs is because the pharmaceutical reps tell us to use them.
Well, it got embedded 15, 18 years ago when the pharmaceutical companies were rolling these products out onto the market, and there was a lot of propaganda.
Pharmaceutical sales reps' job is not to help patients, it's to sell product.
There was a lot of untruthful information put out, and they've admitted that, and they faced civil and criminal penalties for it.
So what we found out was that the promise of the 2001 Intractable Pain Act was not what we thought it would be. That pharmaceutical companies were promising that we're going to be able to relieve people of pain, when in fact they were lying about the addictive properties and how people could be truly addicted to this like no other drugs that we had seen in the marketplace.
Now, one of them that came out with OxyContin was fined $600 million for false advertising and for promulgating the concept that this OxyContin that was very popular at the time was a lot less addictive than it was. They paid $600 million and didn't blink, and of course still in business. They're still in business.
I do not speak to drug reps at all, ever.
Osama bin Laden said, we don't need to destroy America, they're going to do it from the inside out. And he was talking about our addictions, the things that we have to have. And we don't have to have those things.
It's like our society's hell-bent on being addicted to something, and there's going to be that supply. You know, whether it's legal or illegal. Tennessee has a prescription monitoring database, which is a very useful tool. Anytime a person is prescribed a medication, the prescriber is mandated by law to check the database.
The doctors look there and see when the last prescription was written and who wrote it and for the purpose, and then they can make an educated decision about that individual.
It reduces what's called doctor shopping, but it also is a tool where the Department of Health and the medical boards can watch the prescribers.
So if a patient has died and Dr. X has prescribed that patient, and we look up Dr. X and he's had 3 patients die in that year, well, holy smokes.
Every 3 months they identify the top 40, you know, by quantity of prescriptions, and send them a letter and say, you're one of Tennessee's top 40 prescribers, come in and tell us what why is this?
So I think that in of itself is reducing the amount of prescriptions that are written for opioids.
We've seen a downtick in the Upper Cumberland with babies born addicted to drugs. At one point, at our highest, we were around 30% of all patients that were born addicted to drugs, and we're now somewhere around 11.5% with our most recent data. So we've come a long way.
We need to get the message out that you could prevent injury to these babies if you just took responsibility to provide them contraception.
If you are pregnant, our OBs have done a fabulous job of educating them and saying, you need to be off these medications.
Fortunately, that process is happening. The medical profession is realizing the truth. You know, the devastating results are coming into the bright light of day, and things are changing from that perspective.
Unfortunately, it's not my job to make you feel better. It's to keep you from premature death.
Nowhere in medicine in the past have we ever taken a prescriptive authority away from the physician, right, and given it to the patient. This is the first time, the only time that we know about. That's what happened with the 2001 Intractable Pain Act.
And now that we've become realistic and said, you know, when you have your knee replaced, when you have your hip replaced, when you have that surgery, it isn't going to be comfortable, but in the end, it'll be worth it.
We have to reach them at a much earlier age and try to get the message in their head what's going to happen.
There's a real paucity of mental health availability in the Upper Cumberland. We need those physicians to be in rural settings. We need them to be in every neck of the woods so that people have that opportunity.
And then we need to train more addictionologists and addiction psychologists, because this is a disease of the mind as well as of the body. And once people learn to cope, they tend to be able to become unaddicted. Unfortunately, narcotics are a coping skill. It's just not a very good one.
And ways that we could change that are, we could open up more residency spots. That has been stagnant for a number of years.
And it was proven that you could wrap these children at a very young age into love and kindness and compassion in their school and in their church. It didn't matter that it wasn't at home. And they got better, and they didn't become addicted.
It's taken decades to even begin to turn the tide of the opioid crisis. Lives are still being destroyed and lost. Babies are suffering. Teenagers are taking that chance and falling fast into addiction. People are neglecting their careers, and families continue to be broken. But now, as governments and communities begin to become enlightened, they can rise to the occasion and fight the good fight. It's always been a noble aim to ease suffering and pain. Working together, it may just be possible to do that and do no harm.
This is the end of the world as we know it, and I'm like, no, this community rallies, you know, the people come together and they find solutions and they work through problems, and it doesn't destroy us.
We're not there. This is still a problem, but we've come a long way in the last 3 years.
But we have to be more proactive about our own care and not let, not just put that in the hands of somebody else.
Well, it's like I'm going to get a tooth pulled at 1. They will try to give me opioids. I will refuse.
Because, it's your life to take care of, so you really have to be, more responsive in that way.
People pay attention. Life, you only get this in one shot,
This program was made possible by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.